Welcome to the fourth episode of our Victor Pasmore Gallery virtual visits. In the previous episodes, we have often referred to Pasmore's artistic motto of constructing from within, of an artistic approach that does not view abstract art as something which is destructive or removed from the natural world, but rather, in fact, quite the opposite, as something which is constructive, as a meeting place between the artist, the object, and the spectator. It is about a relationship wherein the artist actually stands at the beginning and not at the end of an era of subjective art. In this episode, we will seek to better understand this approach in light of Pasmore's view of the role of the abstract artist and the relation between music and abstraction. One of the works on display at the Victor Pasmore Gallery in Valletta, called the Linear Symphony in 5 movements, is accompanied by a caption that quotes one of Pasmore's mission statements, if you will. I have tried, he tells us, I have tried to compose as music is composed, with formal elements which, in themselves, have no descriptive qualities at all. This mission statement actually continues with a more detailed explanation of what Pasmore intended by these so-called formal elements. And he tells us, having lost their particular identity, these elements are no longer abstractions in the same sense as, say, the drawing of a human head, an animal, or a tree. As these elements combine with each other on the canvas, so are the emotions and ideas evoked. The act of drawing a spiral in a variety of ways will evoke emotions similar to those associated with the spiral movements of nature. Pasmore traced these human gestures and movements in the act of creation to something primordial, to something that is precisely founded in nature. Art imitates nature in the manner of her operation, Pasmore affirms. Painting, like music, is not an imitation of nature. Like nature, painting is solid and made up of parts. The same eye that looks at nature, that looks at it, also looks at nature. To keep music in the picture, we might also add the same ear that listens to music, listens to the sounds of nature. Painting and music share a common subjective standpoint, that is, the artist and the composer, and by extension the viewer or the listener, and their relation to the objective product of nature that can be seen, touched, or even heard. So it might help here to quote Pasmore on his view of the role of the abstract artist, that is, to build from a simple but objective center, and therefore to operate like nature, until a subjective circumference is found. That is, the touch of the artist or of the composer, and the reception of the viewer or the listener.
Well, I think there are two factors which point to the validity of this development. One is the fact that it represents an evolutionary step in the history of the visual arts, comparable perhaps to the development of pure chamber music in the 18th century, and even with the development of pure mathematical reasoning in ancient Greece. The other is the fact that it does answer the dilemma of the contemporary naturalist painter and sculptor, brought about by the modern philosophy of science. Now, by creating this new dynamic relationship, essentially human relationship, between the work of art and the spectator, I think the abstract artist, the modern abstract artist, is constructing something solid and stable, which competes effectively with the fluid, four-dimensional space-time concepts of modern thought.
Now, that was a clip from The Artist Speaks, from the documentary The Artist Speaks. Well, in this brief look at the common dynamic between abstract art and music, we cannot but mention the idea of chaos. That's right, chaos and irrationality as a fundamental ingredient to creation. It sounds somewhat paradoxical, it's true, contradictory even, but we'll soon find out how it is also at the core of Pasmore's post-Second World War works. Importantly, during the late 70s, a decade throughout which Pasmore's musical works seemed to resonate the most loudly, the seemingly chaotic behavior of familiar daily episodes or daily objects that we use every day starts to gain more attention among the intellectual community and effectively becomes a foothold on which new scientific theories are actually based. A chaos full of potential order.
Since the days of Leonardo da Vinci, art and science have walked hand in hand. So today, when science is concentrating its attention much deeper inwards, the visual arts seek to do likewise. By starting from a point at the center of the painting and not outside it, by proceeding from the basis of potential processes and not from the effects of a given model. The painter can bring forth new images of the psyche, which, because of their interior origin and objective analogy, can illuminate the new science of the hidden world.
To quote Pasmore, with the visual and objective world rendered ambiguous by modern scientific ideas like relativity and four dimensions, its representation in painting also became ambiguous, a condition which led to increasing subjective and irrational freedom. End quote. Well, with this reasoning, the more abstract a painting becomes, if I could say so, the more unconditional it actually becomes. The greater freedom it allows and the greater freedom it requests in the viewer, in the eyes and the mind of the viewer. In this way, the work becomes more subjective, freed even from the artist, and more open to possibilities of meaning and feeling. It is the effect of what Pasmore describes as a painting emerging in anonymity, where the new painting can become a sign or a symbol of infinite extension, directly finding its place in the eye and the mind of the spectator.
But today, meaning dissolves in order to create new meaning, and what is known becomes unknown. In art, the images of thought and perception reappear as anonymous objects, before which is always a question. While reason sleeps, the symbol awakes.
So that was a film taken by John Pasmore, the son of Victor Pasmore, from a clip called The Image in Search of Itself. But in any case, this view of abstract art, of the role of the abstract artist and the dynamic between the artist, the object and the spectator, is curiously almost the direct opposite to one of the most common remarks associated with abstract art. As an egoistic work, how many times have we taught this, that only the artist must have known its meaning or its origin. But meanwhile, it eludes us, the spectator. The work cannot speak to us and we cannot relate to it. Cold, distant and objective, we fail to find meaning. And most of us end up turning away and move on towards what is more, let's say, aesthetically or historically familiar. But in so doing, we also turn away from an image that would and should, so to speak, resonate the most with who we are, from anonymity to the specific identity of the spectator. Pasmore's view of abstract art, like music, in fact, that cannot be particularly defined, or like a composition that does not generate one set feeling or one set memory, Pasmore's view of abstract art is one that does not seek to tell the viewer anything specific, for that would be a kind of imposition, a kind of constraint. Rather, in a way, abstract art in this view humbles itself to the point of mattering less than what the viewer thinks. What mattered initially, tells us Pasmore, was not what our scribble would represent, but what it might become, of course, in the mind of the viewer. Well, if our idea of abstraction, generally speaking, seems to be at the opposite end of how Pasmore views it, then even this contrast of opposites would certainly be a point of interest to Pasmore. In the same way that chaos and order or irrationality, spontaneity and control would seem to be opposites to each other. Well, we find this also in the musical compositions of Maestro Charles Camilleri, a Maltese pioneer of modern musical compositions and a peer to Pasmore during his Maltese stay. During a talk once held at the gallery, Master John Gallia noted, for example, how in the music of Charles Camilleri, chaotic dynamics led to the discovery of a disorderly behavior inherent in simple systems that acted as creative processes. This is almost a direct parallel of the simple forms and shapes in spaces, dots, lines, planes that we find in Pasmore's compositions. Camilleri's work was known to Pasmore, and this we know because in the artist's private possession we find, for example, a musical score of Bach's Prelude with notes by Charles Camilleri, musing really on the cosmic and spontaneous qualities of composed and improvised music, echoing perhaps the belief that in our time we are becoming more aware of the difference between one-dimensional space of reversible time or repetition and the infinitely dimensional space of chaos, improvisation. Now, the conscious repetition of forms and subconscious spontaneity are in a constant play in Pasmore's creations. Indeed, the majority of the works he produced in Malta can be seen and discussed with this relation in mind, almost mechanic repetition and precision and surprising spontaneity and randomness. These are actually the same forces that are at play in the works we find in the gallery itself. A harmony of opposing forces, for example, or the linear symphony in 4 movements number 1, or yet another linear symphony number 3, but of course, among others. Even the titles of the works themselves hint at this intimate link between abstract painting and music, the canvas and the score, the formal elements like notes on a page and their transformation into emotion and memory once received by the eye and the ear of the beholder. Perhaps this is precisely what Camilleri meant by the power of sound, or silent sound in the case of Pasmore's painting. Perhaps this is indeed the most abstract reality that Pasmore aspired to absorb in his 2-dimensional works. But whether he succeeded or not, it turns out, was never for Pasmore to tell. And with that, I'll leave you on that note. But thank you for following, and until the next episode, stay tuned and stay safe.